because God resists the proud, but He gives grace, or He gives favor. Or, let me put it this way, the humble have access to His favor. Or put it another way, the humble are in a position to experience His favor. Let's say it that way. Then he says in verse 6, broadening this and going on with it, listen to what he says. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you in due time. Now, I think sometimes when we read a verse like this, and when we hear somebody like I'm doing right now talking about it, all we hear is humble yourself, and we forget the next part. But what I want to focus your attention on is the last part of this verse. It says, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. Now, he doesn't say humble yourselves under the powerless hand of God, or under the impotent hand of God, or under the indifferent hand of God. He says, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. Consider for a moment, the God we're talking about is the God who made the universe, who made the world, who made us, who made everything that we see and touch and experience in our lives. He made it all with His Word, as a matter of fact. He's got some power on His side, the mighty hand of God. And then look at what it says in the last part. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you in due time. That He may exalt you. What He's got in mind and what His plan and His intention and His desire and His will is that you be exalted. Now, that's, to me, when I say it that way, and this is the King James language, we're going to read it in another translation in a moment. When I read that word exalt, it makes me a little uncomfortable to think of myself exalted. I would rather, I don't feel comfortable with that. But really what he's saying with this is, he means experiencing His favor, or another way to say it is His promotion or His lifting up. Now we think, the world thinks to get ahead is all about me fighting my way and clawing my way, and everybody's life is different. And it's interesting that these words like humble and proud and exalt, and they're a little bit general and a little bit vague because, and I think it's deliberately that way, because they apply differently in each one of our individual lives. But God's got it in mind to exalt us. God's got it in mind to promote us. God has it in mind to lift us up and to benefit us. But in order for that to be so, it's necessary. Notice that it says, for us, what our response to that is to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God and let Him do it, in other words. Humble ourselves, and it says, He will exalt us in due time. Now, Anton, let's read it from the Message translation. Let's just go back to the verse 6. Oh, that's where we are. Give me the Message on this. I like the way the Message says it here. So be content with who you are. This is interesting that when King James says humble yourself, Eugene Peterson in the Message translates, instead of humble yourself or be humble, clothed with humility, he says be content with who you are and don't put on airs. That's his way of defining what a person who's proud and haughty does. They put on airs. Be content with who you are. Don't put on airs. God's strong hand is on you. That's a good promise, by the way. I like to think of it that way. Think of it that way in your life. God's strong hand is on you for your benefit. He'll promote you at the right time. Now, again, this word, this expression, He'll promote you at the right time, the meaning of that applies differently in each one of our lives, because each one of us has different circumstances in our lives. But all of us are challenged in this life of faith to really believe that that's true. Now, that really is His idea, and that really is His thought and His will, that we be, what does it say? That He'll promote you at the right time. Now, how that works out in each one of our individual lives depends on who we are and what we face and what we're dealing with. But God's plan is that we be exalted or promoted or lifted up or blessed or benefited by His mighty hand. What our response to that is, and our faith response is, if we believe that's true, what do we do? Well, Peter tells us what to do. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. Now, before we examine what that might mean, I want you to see that Jesus taught this exact same thing in a very interesting parable. Anton, go back to King James and give me Luke chapter 14, beginning with verse 7. Luke's Gospel, chapter 14, and I want to start reading with verse 7. Let's see. Matthew, Mark, Luke. Yeah. Here's an interesting parable that Jesus puts forward. You know, by the way, a lot of these parables come about because Jesus was dealing with some people in his life who were very proud and haughty. The Pharisees. They were very self-righteous, and they were very proud and put on airs and very self-conceited and haughty individuals. Jesus, as we know, he said, "Learn from me, I'm meek and lowly in heart." Jesus is the best model of humility for us. Yet the chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes treated him in a very bad way, and very haughty and proud. And so he said a lot of these parables with them in mind. But notice, I think they're applicable for us to learn from as well. Verse 7, he put forth a parable. Now, by the way, a parable is a made-up story. He's not speaking literally about literal things, but he's giving us an example or a fable or a parable or a story that's constructed to make a moral point. He put forth a parable to those who were bidden, when he marked out how they chose the chief rooms, and saying unto them, when you are bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee, and he that bade thee, and him come and say to thee, give this man place, and thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit in the lowest room, that when he that bade thee cometh, he may say unto thee, friend, go up higher. Those are nice words. Friend, go up higher. And then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, or be brought low. And he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Now, my main reason for reading this is to show you that Jesus taught the exact same thing. The advice that he gives is to, in this parable of people going to the wedding, and he said he noticed how they all sat in the best place. They all sat in the place of honor, set themselves in the place of honor and in the highest place. And Jesus said, no, don't do that. Go sit in the lowest place. That's an example of humbling yourself. Go sit in the lowest place so that the person who's in charge can then say, come up higher. Now, the person in charge lifting up or exalting or promoting and saying, come up higher, does that because, first of all, the person that he's saying it to has humbled themselves. And in this parable and in this story, he likens it to, in an analogy, taking the lowest seat or the worst seat, or taking a humble position. Humbling yourself, that's the example here. Now, notice that this is a story. This is a story of a wedding and seating arrangements. It's a metaphor. The reason I think sometimes that Jesus tells some of these truths in parable form is that the specific application then is left to each individual for their own life. See, I can't stand up here and tell you how to apply it in your life because I don't live your life. But this truth, if you let this sink into your thinking, you'll know how to apply this as you live your life. And Jesus is saying here that the person in charge has it in mind to lift you up and to say to you, come up higher. And to, as we saw that Peter said, his idea, God's idea, his plan and his purpose and his will for our lives is that we be promoted. But he's got to do the promoting. He's got to do the lifting up. He's got to do the establishing of that grace in our lives. And notice, again, I remind you that Peter said, at the right time. And we just got to trust him to know what the right time is. Now, if you ask me, the right time is right now. But I'm not God. But you see, I've just got to recognize the fact he knows more than I do. He's smarter than I am. And I've got to also, by faith, believe that he really does care about me. Now, you need to do the same thing too. You've got to believe by faith that he loves you, that he cares about you, that he knows about your life, and he knows everything that you face and that you deal with. And his plan for you is not that you be suppressed and pushed down and go through life on the bottom rung of the ladder, so to speak. He wants to promote us, every one of us. But what's necessary for us to let him promote us is that we let him do it. And as Jesus said, humble yourself. Whoever humble, look at verse 11. For whosoever, and this I guess is generally and universally true for anyone, whosoever exalts himself shall be abased, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Now what that tells me is if I want to be exalted, what I need to seek to do is to figure out how to humble myself somehow. And again, this word, this definition, this humbling yourself, I can't define it for you. You've got to make that application in your own life.